We're counting down the 8 most perilous moments when Cold War tensions pushed the world to the edge of nuclear disaster. From early blockades and battlefield escalations to split-second technical errors and diplomatic breakdowns, each crisis on this list is ranked by just how close a single misstep came to triggering the unthinkable. Which confrontation best reveals the fragility of nuclear peace? Let's begin with the standoff in Berlin that set the stage for every near miss that followed. Number 1. The Berlin blockade and airlift of 1948 to 1949 marked the Cold War's first major test under the looming threat of atomic weapons. On June 24, 1948, Soviet forces cut off all road, rail and river access to West Berlin, isolating more than 2 million civilians in an attempt to force the Western Allies out of the city. Stalin's gamble was clear. He intended to challenge Western resolve without open conflict, but he risked a direct clash if the Allies tried to break the blockade by force. Rather than send tanks, the United States and Britain launched a massive airlift, Operation Vittles, flying in food, coal and medical supplies through narrow air corridors. At its peak, the airlift delivered up to 1,398 flights in a single day, ultimately moving 2.3 million tons of supplies over nearly a year. Each flight carried the risk of a fatal miscalculation. A wrong turn, a Soviet fighter's misinterpretation, or a stray shot could have triggered a military response. Telegrams between General Clay and Secretary Marshall reveal the tension behind every decision, as Allied commanders weighed the danger of Soviet forces shooting down a plane against the need to sustain Berlin. The crisis ended without a shot fired, but the world saw how logistics, not just firepower, could decide the fate of a divided city, and how close a blockade could come to igniting a nuclear confrontation. Number 2. The Korean War's escalation in 1950 brought the Cold War's first real prospect of atomic weapons being used on an active battlefield. As United Nations forces advanced toward the Yalu River, Chinese volunteers crossed into Korea in October, catching United States commanders off guard. General Douglas MacArthur, leading United Nations forces, pressed for expanded bombing campaigns, including the possible use of nuclear weapons against Chinese supply lines. Strategic Air Command. B-29 bombers stood ready in the Pacific, and atomic bombs were moved into theatre storage, putting the world's most destructive weapons within operational reach. President Truman, alarmed by MacArthur's willingness to act independently, faced a crisis of civilian control. Tensions peaked when a ciphering error delayed Truman's urgent message to Moscow, and intercepted Soviet cables hinted at misread intentions on both sides. In April 1951, Truman dismissed MacArthur, making clear that only elected leaders would decide on nuclear use. This decision pulled back from the brink, but for months a single order or miscommunication could have triggered the first nuclear war. Number 3. The Taiwan Strait crises of 1954 to 1955 and 1958 turned a narrow stretch of sea into one of the Cold War's most volatile nuclear flashpoints. In January 1955, Chinese artillery unleashed heavy shelling on the offshore islands of Quemoy and Matsu, drawing US Navy destroyers armed with nuclear depth charges into the strait. President Eisenhower's public threats to use atomic weapons signaled just how high the stakes had become. The crisis deepened in August 1958 when a sudden radar ghost contact appeared on US Navy screens, briefly suggesting a missile launch from mainland China. For several tense minutes, the Joint Chiefs prepared for a possible nuclear response, only to discover the contact was an atmospheric anomaly. Navy action reports from the period show how close misread signals came to triggering disaster. In response, the United States introduced dual verification safeguards for nuclear release orders in the Pacific. The Taiwan Strait's combination of real-time technical glitches, live nuclear weapons at sea, and rapid-fire political messaging made it a uniquely perilous arena, where a single false alarm could have started a nuclear war. Number 4. The U-2 spy plane incident of May 1960 exposed just how thin the line was between intelligence gathering and outright war. On the morning of May 1st, a high-altitude U-2 reconnaissance aircraft piloted by Francis Gary Powers lifted off from Peshawar, Pakistan, crossing deep into Soviet airspace. Soviet radar operators initially misclassified the intruder as a weather balloon, delaying the scramble of interceptor jets and air defense missiles. When the aircraft was finally identified, a salvo of missiles brought it down near Sverdlovsk, and Powers was captured alive. The United States, caught off guard, first tried to cover up the mission as a lost weather research flight. But the Soviets quickly produced both the wreckage and Powers himself, forcing President Eisenhower to admit to the espionage in a televised address. The timing could not have been worse. Just days before a planned Paris summit that promised a thaw in United States and Soviet relations, Khrushchev seized the opportunity to denounce American aggression, demanding an apology and walking out of the talks on May 16th. CIA flight logs, Soviet radar screenshots, and newsreel footage from Powers' trial reveal how a single intelligence failure erased months of diplomatic progress. The collapse of the summit closed off a rare avenue for detente, leaving both superpowers more distrustful and setting the stage for the Berlin and Cuban crises that followed. Number 5. The Berlin Wall crisis of 1961 brought Cold War tensions to the heart of a divided city. On August the 13th, East German authorities, backed by Soviet approval, began erecting a concrete barrier overnight, severing streets, families, and escape routes across Berlin. The wall's sudden appearance shocked Western leaders. But it was the events of October the 27th that brought the world closest to disaster. That day, at Checkpoint Charlie, American and Soviet tanks faced each other less than 100 meters apart, engines rumbling and guns uncovered. A misdated telegram from Khrushchev to Ulbricht, intercepted and logged by West German defense, triggered a false alarm of imminent Soviet invasion. Meanwhile, a transmission delay in Bundeswehr radar reports led to a temporary elevation of NATO's alert status, with US nuclear artillery and bombers on heightened readiness. For 16 hours, armoured columns stood motionless, waiting for a signal that never came. Only quiet back-channel diplomacy, messages relayed through embassies rather than official cables, allowed both sides to step back. The standoff ended as silently as it began, but for one night the fate of millions hung on the discipline of tank crews and the speed of a single telegram. Number 6. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962 brought the world to the edge of nuclear war more than any other Cold War standoff. On October 14, 1962, United States reconnaissance imagery confirmed the presence of Soviet medium-range ballistic missiles in Cuba, each capable of striking major United States cities within minutes. Over the next 13 days, President Kennedy's executive committee, known as EXCOM, debated whether to launch a full-scale airstrike or impose a naval quarantine. Audio from those tense meetings reveals just how divided the advisors were, with some pressing for immediate military action and others warning of uncontrollable escalation. As United States forces moved to DEFCON 3, a single misread letter from Khrushchev delayed a diplomatic response, raising the risk of miscalculation. The most perilous moment came on October the 27th, 1962, when a Soviet submarine, B-59, cornered by United States destroyers, received signals it interpreted as the start of war. Only the refusal of one officer, Vasily Arkhipov, to authorize the launch of a nuclear torpedo prevented catastrophe. Behind the scenes, Kennedy secretly agreed to withdraw United States missiles from Turkey in exchange for the Soviet pullback, a deal kept hidden from the public. The crisis ended without a shot, but for several days, the fate of millions hinged on human restraint, technical errors, and the thinnest threads of communication. Number 7. The Able Archer exercise of 1983 brought the Cold War's nuclear danger into the computer age. Over 5 days in November, NATO ran a command exercise simulating the countdown to nuclear war, with new communications formats and coded release messages that mimicked real launch protocols for the first time. For Soviet leaders, these changes were indistinguishable from genuine attack preparations. At Soviet early warning centers, intelligence officers flagged the exercise as a possible cover for a first strike, triggering Operation RYAN alerts and raising the Soviet military to its highest DEFCON level since the Cuban Missile Crisis. On November the 10th, a software bug in the OCO satellite system misread the simulated NATO traffic as actual missile launches, compounding the panic inside the Soviet General Staff. Only after a direct hotline clarification from Brussels on November the 12th did the Soviets stand down. The Able Archer scare revealed how new technology and procedural realism, meant to improve readiness, could drive misperception to the brink of disaster, where a misunderstood drill threatened to start a real nuclear war. And finally, in first place, the world's closest brush with accidental nuclear war unfolded in the early hours of September 26, 1983. At 2 a.m. coordinated Universal Time, a bank of monitors deep inside the Serpukhov 15 command bunker lit up with a blaring red alert. The Soviet OCO satellite network was reporting 5 incoming American missiles. According to standing orders, Colonel Stanislav Petrov was expected to pass the alarm up the chain, triggering a launch on warning response by the Soviet strategic rocket forces. But Petrov hesitated. He noticed that only one sensor had registered launches, while ground radar showed nothing, which was unlikely in a real American attack. Trusting his instinct over the machine, Petrov withheld the alarm. Within minutes, a second OCO satellite clarified the truth. Sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds had fooled the system. Petrov's restraint averted an automatic retaliatory strike that could have ended millions of lives. In the aftermath, Soviet command quietly instituted a dual verification rule, requiring 2 independent confirmations before any launch order could proceed. The incident was buried in classified reports for years, but it stands as a stark reminder that even the most sophisticated technology can fail, and that Schwarztimes, the fate of the world rests on a single human decision. Across all 8 crises, one truth stands out. Nuclear peace hinges on human judgment under pressure, not just on strategy or technology. The line between catastrophe and restraint remains razor thin. In a world still armed to the teeth, that lesson is as urgent now as ever.